Hi guys, Natalie here, Only One United. Back for a long time, been a long time. It was a busy summer, great start to the season. But we're not really here to talk about starts of the season. I'm sure it'll slip in. We're here to talk about an important issue, diversity. Everyone getting a fair chance. Obviously, you know me, I'm Natalie, but I'm going to go around the screen and just speak to the guys here, and then we'll get into the debate. So, Michael, do you want to introduce yourself to anyone who's watching first time? Tell us about yourself.
Hello, so my name's Michael McCann. I'm a UK based women's and men's football journalist and broadcaster, and amongst other things, have sort of done my best to educate myself on discrimination and racism, have worked in the past with the Sports People's Think Tank, a group that brought evidence to Parliament about the lack of black managers in the men's game. Had been sort of as a little side project from commentating regularly on the WSL, doing research into what I saw as a disparity in numbers of non-white players between the WSL and the Premier League and the EFL that I also commentate on. Then the Beth Mead thing happened on Monday, and that kind of pushed me because it was topical to sort of try and get that research done and out there. And I published that on Wednesday in relation to playing numbers in a big Twitter thread, just trying to kind of, I guess, encourage meaningful discussion around this issue. And also, I think it's primarily obviously important that we listen to non-white voices about what needs to change and the way things are. But also, I didn't want to be another white person so scared to speak up about this that then what you get is a situation where ethnic minorities feel a huge pressure to do all the talking by themselves and raise all the issues by themselves, and that can leave people incredibly isolated, I guess. So that's
Yeah.
the standpoint I come from.
Thanks, Michael. Sandra, do you want to tell everyone, welcome to the show, tell everyone where you come from, tell everyone a bit about yourself?
Hi, so I cover women's football, primarily the Women's Super League for Sun Sport. I've been doing that for about 3 seasons or so. And so that's my main area. Then, I mean, prior to doing stuff on the women's game, I used to go to men's non-league games, but that's me, yeah. So covering women's game for Sun Sport.
Brilliant. And Rich, welcome. Tell everyone about yourself.
Similar to Sandra, I'm a women's football writer. Have been for some time, and look after the media and PR for Sheffield United women as well in the Championship. So it's two kind of jobs that sort of contradict each other, but keeps me on my toes.
Definitely. Listen, Beth Mead is what has sort of opened this topic. I think it's a topic that needs to be spoken about. I'm going to read through for anyone who maybe hasn't seen her comments or is just seeing a name bandied about or even didn't know what she said, don't understand. We're going to just go through that, talk about what's changed, talk about how we can make a difference, etc., etc. But I think it was the 8th of November, because that's when I've got it on my phone. They did a article, The Guardian, with Beth Mead talking about winning the Euros, talking about a new book, talking about Ballon d'Or. And then a question came up, and it went like this. I'm curious, this is what the article says. I'm curious as to why there are a few black players in the England squad. Mead shakes her head when asked about the anonymity. I'm not good. Suggesting there might be a residue issue with racial prejudice in the development of English women's football. And then she says, I think it's completely coincidental. We put our best 11 out and you don't think of anyone's race or anything like that. It's just more of an outsider's perspective. They then later changed that, The Guardian, and it went to Beth Mead shakes her head when curiously asked why. However, she talks about there should be more done to ensure football is accessible to the game's grassroots to ensure diversity at all levels. Mead doesn't think there is a concern in regards to racism in elite women's football, saying it's coincidental that we put our best 11 out. So the same quote for me. I know me and Michael, we're all talking about the differences in the first version and the second version. For me personally, I think they're both bad as each other. I think version 2 makes it worse because she's saying there's no racism in elite level football, but there is in grassroots. And for me, that just doesn't add up in my head. I think it was a very ignorant thing that she said. I think it sort of speaks to the privilege that she's in. She feels comfortable. That's her safe space, so she can sort of, feels happy to say it. Feels happy to say, listen, I don't think about race. I don't see race. But how does her teammates feel? I look at Lauren James, Ebony Salmon, they're in now. But it wasn't an easy journey straight to get in there, whereas it maybe was easier for other of their white counterparts, And when I say easy, I don't mean I mean sort of to get in that team. They've only just got in when, in my opinion, I think, both of them, those young players could have been in a lot earlier. They weren't. There's other young players that maybe got in ahead of them, which might not be the reason. But I suppose, Sandra, what do you think when you see that? When you see completely coincidental, the best, it just doesn't. It didn't feel right. It felt. I know we're going to come on to the other two and see, but as a black woman myself and yourself, I just felt like she was just dismissing it. Like, how can you say that? These are the kind of things that when I'm in work and there's not a lot of black staff, they just say, oh, it's, the best. It just, when we know that's not right. We see things about CVs and your name and, people make comments and I've had it in work. I've had, little microaggressions where it's like, you're all right, Natalie, but the rest, they're loud, they're aggressive, they're all these kind of things, all these tropes. And I just feel like for her to say that with the platform that she has, I just feel it was so stupid. And for not to come out and even say, I'm sorry if I've upset anyone, because I'm upset. And yes, you might think, who's Natalie? But I'm upset. So if I'm upset, I've seen a lot of other people are upset. For not even to acknowledge that, I just think it's very bad. I mean, what do you feel, Sandra, when you saw the quote? Just initial reaction kind of feelings.
Well, for me, I would like to be actually sat there in the room whilst the interview's happening, to see the full, the whole thing, and the conversation leading up, the whole thing, just to hear it for myself. For me, my thing is that I'm all about wanting to see what the solutions are, because this issue of lack of diversity at the highest levels of the women's game, in terms of recently, has been discussed. I haven't been covering women's game as long as, say, for example, Rich has, but I know it's something that's been discussed year after year. You hear, the things of why aren't there a higher number of Black, Asian, and I mean, and they're not even in, there aren't that very many Asians in the Women's Super League, but I want to hear, okay, so this is the issue, what's the solution, and how long are we going to get to the point where you say, for example, you look at the French team. I think Anita Asante mentioned the French team in the Euros, and 15 players, non-white, Black and non-white players in their squad. I mean, where do we get to the point where, if there is hidden talent of players who could be the next best striker, the next best goalkeeper, the next best number 10 for England, and they happen to be Black or from minority ethnic backgrounds, if they are hidden and we're missing them, how do we get to the point where they're being discovered and brought through? And then just looking at, how do you get to a point where, if you've got your regional talent centres in the country and they haven't got very or any numbers of non-white players in there, how do you get to a point where they can get to those places? So, I mean, with I can see why, people might have looked at the first version, for example, of that quote and thought, oh, not happy with that. At the same time, for me, I think it's about the solution, because there's a lot of this topic will keep coming up again and again if there are a lack of players, in the WSL from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, and also in the England team. So for me, it's like, well, what's the next step to get to the point where we can address it and solve it, so to speak? But
yeah, no. I mean, Michael, when you saw I do get it, and we are going to go into that, and I'm not, because I think I was even on a podcast with you, Sandra, and we talked about this. So I'm in the point where, yeah, we keep saying this, hearing the same issues and not seeing much change. I know there are things, and we're going to talk about, the change from RTC to ETC, and this is going to be the big difference changer. But for then her to say what she said, I just think it was just naive and ignorant. I
can see why, so especially when you read the first version, people might think, oh, not. But for me, I think what's the next step, and also, what's the solution going forward? So it's not every year this is the same thing that keeps coming up, and there's only a small number of players, 10 years from now in the WSL who happen to be from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. When you look at it in comparison to, say, the Premier League.
Yeah. Well, Michael, what did you think? Obviously, when you saw it, initial reaction, and I suppose just like what Sandra's saying, we're fed up of always having this, bringing back up, saying the same things, and we're seeing the same thing. And then, like you say, Premier League, and I know we're going to touch on your thread if you want to go onto it, or we'll save that bit and I'll come into Richard and come back to you. But when you saw the Beth Mead tweet initially,
Yeah, I thought it was a really missed opportunity for an athlete that has a huge amount of profile to use their platform to raise an issue that has been regularly spoken about in the women's game for a long period of time. And indeed, for example, Lotte Wubben-Moy, also of Arsenal, also white, has spoken about very eloquently. She was included in the thread you just mentioned, in terms of the way she's spoken about understanding her white privilege, understanding what that means, interacting with the tweet from Jordan about Deborah Nelson from Football Beyond Borders, the answer from Leah Williamson, which was also on Miriam Walker-Khan's thread. When you compare those answers from Leah and Lotte to this, yeah, it's not a good answer. And one thing I find quite concerning is the way so many people seem to find it difficult to come out and just say it wasn't a good answer. It's possible to come out and say that wasn't a good answer to that question without saying that means that you sort of have some huge problem or agenda or issue with Beth Mead. We're in a situation now on Twitter more than ever is this really polarizing thing where it seems to be either you're sort of wading in to find any excuse for that answer possible, or wading in to sort of go completely the other way. What I'd say is it was clearly not a good answer. I don't really understand how anybody could look at that answer and think it was a good one. To me, though, it also on a wider level highlights the need to keep talking about this. And it also highlights a need for this issue to be properly in the spotlight, which kind of brings me back to the thing that I found curious, which was that on Monday night, I could see on my timeline a huge amount of women's football fans talking about it, and yet a lot of others not. Which brings me to an answer I want to read out, actually, which was from Flo Lloyd-Hughes, who is white, covers women's football brilliantly, and kind of picked up on the same vibe that I picked up on. So forgive me because I'm looking off screen to read it because I don't want to misquote somebody. But she said, deafening silence around Mead's comments on race and the England team. Hope there's writing in the works. Speaks volumes about the ignorance and denial and diversity in race and women's football. There are certain things that cannot be tackled through schemes and programs alone. In the space of a week, she's spoken about LGBTQ rights in Qatar while being an ambassador for a school in Dubai, thus positioning herself as a socially conscious athlete, and then denied any issue of race in the lack of non-white players in the England team. It's so ignorant. If a player is going to be doing a huge press tour to promote a book, then they need to understand what they're saying and how it's going to be perceived. If this was a senior men's player, the reaction would be a lot different. One person then comes in and replies, saying that Mead comes across as defensive. Flo replies, completely not my problem. These inverted commas in referring to what she perceives Mead's attitude to be. But when it's the World Cup in Qatar, she seems to have an opinion, ... This is a lot bigger than one player and represents the whole system and wider issues within women's football. It's much more than just about one player's comments and words. I'm sure they would reconsider and potentially regret. And then she goes on to finish by saying, it's not really about Beth Mead. It's about understanding that women's football will not change with schemes and programs alone. The issue runs deeper than that, and it requires the education of everyone in the game. Now, a few days on, I know Flo's written an extended piece in The Athletic. I found myself struggling to disagree with much of that, to be honest. And what I found really interesting too, as a subtext in terms of the levels of media coverage, shall we say, around this, is Miriam Walker-Khan, who's a fantastic journalist, and is mixed race, replied to Flo. And I thought this was a very telling reply from someone who is in women's football media and is not white and has done fantastic work covering this issue for a long, long period of time and issues around this. So Miriam said to Flo, thank you for even talking about it, Flo, as always, and not just leaving it up to people of colour to speak on. When so many parts of the media ignore the issue completely while reporting on every other tiny, minute detail of the sport, it's clear where priorities lie. Now, that's from someone who is a fantastic journalist, works at BBC Sport, and is very good at what they do, and very on the button with all of this, and has the experience of being a non-white woman in media. To me, I think those quotes speak volumes, to say the very least.
I don't know if anyone wants to jump in, or I can see a few comments. I'm going to come to them. I'm going to address them. But Rich, I just want to ask you, I suppose, your opinion initially. But there's this comment here from Vicky, and it made me think of you and the role that you do at Sheffield. And I suppose you're in a championship club, so it's not like WSL full time, etc., etc. But there is more visibility. You're getting more people through the door at Sheffield. You know, more fans are coming. People want to know what's going on with women's football. You know, you had the great games at the Euros at Sheffield. And more visibility is great, but the players need media training and diversity training. Is that something that happens? Do you think that would help? Sandra, I'll come back to you as well, because I can see you moving there. I just want to know what goes on at a club. Obviously, you don't have to go into details, but is that something you do? What's the you tell us?
Not massively in terms of Chef. Like, we don't do a humongous amount of outside media, and if we do, it's kind of local media and things like that, and it'll be around, certain games and things. And to be fair, players are a bit more switched on, I think, a lot of the time than you probably think, especially the sort of more older ones or the more experienced ones. I've never really found myself having to media train someone, sometimes the younger ones, but not in terms of say this, say that, just in terms of just helping them a little bit because they're nervous and things like that. I think definitely at the top level, it happens a lot more. I think certainly with England, not just England, I think any major national team, any major club, players get media trained a lot. Like, we've seen it. And in the past, we've even had, I think it was before the World Cup, in 2019, they actually had like a mock media day at St. George's Park with like actual journalists there. And it was basically like a practice run of what like the tournament might be like for the players. So they certainly get media trained, which makes the answer sort of even stranger, because I'm sure they will have been briefed on kind of what to say in that scenario. I'm sort of with Sandra on that. I would have really liked to have been in the room, and me and Sandra were chatting about this the other day in terms of what the actual phrasing of the whole question was, because it was in itself, the stuff about the best 11 and things like that is probably true, but it's that first bit for me, the coincidental part, which kind of stood out, which made me question a little bit what was actually asked or what Mead is actually referring to, because it's not coincidental. I think we all know that. So yeah, there's a lot to take in around it, and I think hopefully we do need to talk. Like, we know it's an issue. The facts are all there. Like, we can see it in plain daylight that we're not getting, enough black girls through, and for whatever reason. And I think that's where the complications come in. And again, I'm with Sandra in terms of wanting to see the solutions and wanting to see the end result. But I don't think it's something where you can just sit there and say, oh, it's just one thing and we fix that and then it's solved. I think there's definitely structural things we can do as a sport in terms of facilities and accessibility, but I think there's cultural things, I think there's class things, I think there's things that are way out of sort of people's control, the FA's control. I still stand by, and I said this to you, I think I understand that, and it's a difficult balance because we do need to talk about it, but I think the right people need to talk about it as well. I still think asking the players, I know some players have given really eloquent answers, and Lotta did, and Leah Williamson did, but there is only so much they can say. And obviously Serena was asked about it yesterday, and she gave probably about the most sort of standard reply you could expect in terms of probably the answer that Beth Mead should have given, and that probably anybody will give, because it's not their problem to solve. They can't. So they can talk about it. They can do this. They can do that. They can't solve it. The questions have to be for Sue Campbell, for Matt Bullingham, for people like that are in control of the situation. And I agree that players have a voice and that they can speak up and look, they should say the right thing. But I think we're aiming it at the wrong people. There's a lot to take in from it, and there's a lot to do. There's a lot to work on, and it's not a simple thing to talk about. It's obviously a very complex issue. It always has been, racism and things like that. And it's not a simple solution, but, Flo's right and Michael's right. We can't, if we hide away from it, it's never going to get solved. And even if the four of us, we have no control over how we fix it, we need to keep it, in the sort of public conscience.
And just following on from what Rich was saying there about keeping it in the public conscience. I mean, you mentioned Miriam, who's actually and Flo, and both of them have done some excellent reporting on this issue. There's something about and they very report on it regularly, but there's something about this. It always seems to come up around Black History Month. So away from just talking about it once a year as Black History Month, whip out the diversity story. Oh, low numbers, There's something about talking about it on a regular basis, and also talking to, the young players and coaches at the grassroots level, in terms of particularly those who may well have had chances or opportunities at a high level when it hasn't quite come off, and particularly those who may well have had those opportunities not come off because they feel it might be because of their background. Something about more of those stories, more of those experiences being heard on a regular basis, and hearing what do they see as the barriers and obstacles. And obviously, with this, the government inquiry that Karen Carney's leading into the women's game, there's something about how much of that is going to be looking at this issue of the lack of, Black, Asian, minority ethnic players at the highest level. Like, how much of that inquiry will be looking at that and feeding into, the challenges that players might be facing if they're facing racism, those experiences, and getting, sharing the details of those experiences, and then what is the, I know it's, as Rich said, it's not something that it's not easily solvable. It's not like a one fixed thing. It's like, what can be done to try and address it, things like you say, accessibility, regional talent centres being located in areas that are not necessarily the most diverse, too far away for players to reach, scouting, the whole bit. But, Rich might have more, to say in terms of that side of things, in terms of, how when the players come through, when they're coming to open days, trials, how many of them are from Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities? Because I guess it can't be helped if, say, for example, you've got an open day and it's only one particular ethnic group coming through. I mean, how many of them are? And then if there are, and they get to play, if they top off, is it necessarily down to the fact that they might not have been able to make it because of talent, or is it because, I don't feel comfortable here and what have you? I think there's something about looking at all the challenges and addressing these, through, for example, this government inquiry, but then also just talking more and speaking more to the players at the lower end of the game to see, what are the issues they're facing.
Just, you hit the nail on the head. I'm going to go to Rich on that question that you just asked, but when you say it's always seems to roll out when someone makes a point. Well, so like when Beth Mead does a question like answer like this, or like you say, Black History Month, that's when everyone they roll out, and these articles seem to be commissioned. Whereas sort of maybe day to day, you don't see an interview with Bunny Shaw, an interview with this, an interview with these Black players, an interview with Ebony Salmon. You don't hear about her growing up and these kind of things. It's only on a specific month, and I feel like, and this is not, sometimes we in the women's game, like what Flo says, when it's LGBT issue in Qatar, she can easily say it, but why do we not hear from, like you say, Bunny, top goal scorer, Black, Jamaican? Why are we not hearing their stories as much? Viv Williams, from Brighton, captain. Why are we not hearing her story? And I know, this and that. Everyone wants to hear from Mead. Everyone wants to hear from Williams. But, I agree with you, Sandra, in that respect. But back to you, Rich. When you have these open days, I know where your training centre is. It's in the centre, pretty much, of Sheffield, in a housing estate. What are the numbers? What is the numbers? And I just want to know, I suppose, do you think, just on what Sandra's saying, anyone can come in, would an open day with, I'm going to say like a Black only, Asian only, do you think that would, because I'm just throwing out ideas now, and like you said, I don't know if that would help or hinder, but I just feel like you're saying getting little girls playing is a start, isn't it? And how many little Black Asian girls are playing? Probably not as many as little white girls. So that's why we're in the situation that we're in, kind of thing. But Rich, just touch on Sheffield and etc. if you can.
Yeah, I don't know if a sort of, open training day for certain ethnicities is the right way to. I don't know. Like, I'm with you. I don't really know what the solution is with that. Whether it's the right thing to do to sort of start having,
not just, but just like an extra day. I don't know.
Yeah,
I just feel like there's something to make people feel more comfortable.
I mean, we, like you say, our training ground, and this has been one of the topics, obviously, around training grounds now that sort of traditionally are being moved out into the suburbs because clubs need more space, and they're building these big, massive, fancy training grounds now to obviously house men's teams, women's teams, a whole host of academy teams, etc. And obviously within city centres, there's not a huge amount of room. So you're seeing a lot of clubs now go out into countrysides away from built up areas. But ours is not one of those. Like, Nat, you've been. It's got a housing estate essentially on every side. And yeah, we have trial days regularly-ish. I'm not often there, but we had one for our new under-21s team in the summer. I went down and watched. I think we had 90 girls registered. I don't think 90 turned up. I think we probably had maybe 60 or 70 that turned up. And I mean, I wouldn't ever say a figure because subconsciously I don't think I was even thinking about it. But I could have probably counted maybe the amount of girls that were Asian or Black on probably one hand. So I think that brings to another issue in terms of when we talk about how we can bring them through is we can't bring them through if we're not getting them, and the question then is, why are we not even getting to that stage? Why are they not even coming to trials, when we're in an accessible area? And again, it's one of those where you don't really have an answer, whether it comes down to past experiences at Grassroots, whether it comes down to that they don't see people like themselves on TV, when they're watching England, they don't have those role models, bar the odd few. I don't know. Obviously, we have, two girls that have come through our academy, like, in our first team now, Tamara and Shanae. Tamara's 18, Shanae's 16, both playing in our first team, and both have been around the England youth teams. And if there's anything that gives me a little bit of solace with it, if you're seeing one or two more now. Obviously, we saw with Arsenal at the weekend. We saw with Brighton, younger girls that are now making their debuts from different ethnic backgrounds. So, I mean, maybe they're outliers. Maybe there are more coming through that we don't know about. I mean, you look at the England youth teams; it's quite similar to the first team. I know you went to the 23s game last night, and it's kind of a similar story there. So, yeah, I don't know. I think there's so many things, like I said before, that come down to, you know, experiences as children and cultures and things. Because if we're not even getting them as far as coming for a trial, like, what can we do? People will turn around to us and say your development team, you know, is largely completely white, but we can't take them if they're not coming.
Yeah, so
Can I just say though about that 20? Oh, go on, Sandra.
No, go ahead.
That 23, there was more black and mixed girls for the Netherlands, so half their team was black and mixed, compared to just Jess Naz for England. But I just go on, Sandra.
I mean, Rich makes a good point. Though, is if, like, for example, you have whether it's like an open day, if you have one, or if they're, you know, when you're having the kind of the recruitment and they're not there, it's how do you get them there? And then as with the FA, I know that they, you know, in July they announced that they were going to open these emerging talent centres, 60 of them right across the country. So, and they're linked with clubs across the country, including Sheffield United. So I guess it's, you know, they want to increase the number of young female players up to, I think, more than 4,200 by 2024, summer of 2024. So I guess it'd be interesting to see what proportion of those young players that come through those emerging talent centres will be from, you know, Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. Yeah, that's the challenge, I suppose. And Rich will see it because he works there. But then if you're having an open day and the players aren't there, that it's you know, so how do you go about boosting numbers? Is it like more stronger links with grassroots setups in areas that are more ethnically diverse? I don't quite know what the solution is, and if there are much higher numbers of players from who are non-white at the grassroots, and they at that point they've got the ambition that they want to, you know, one day become an England international. You know, what is kind of, is it just down to talent, or are there other things? But it's a very, very kind of, there's a myriad of issues that need to be looked at.
Mm. I mean, Harry's saying here women's football is now more visible. Lauren James, I think so. I feel she'll be, well, I've always talked about Lauren being the one and, you know, shining through. But Catherine here says an issue, and I just want to come to it. It's not just an underrepresentation of players, but it's managers, coaches, staff, in both the women's and the men's game. And I know you touched on that, didn't you, Michael? But this affects participation, and I just want to touch not just on that, but just in my opinion, this is totally me, and people can shut me down. I just feel like the women's game, when there was Hope Powell, I never really even watched women's football, but I always knew of Hope Powell. When I first started to watch women's football, that was one person I wanted to meet because, you know, it matters. It means something. And then obviously she left and it went to Mark Sampson. And I just feel like they are downplaying the issue. I feel like again, I didn't really watch women's football, but I knew of Hope. I knew when Hope left, and then I knew of the issues when he came in, of the comments of this. He said to Drew Spence, how many times you've been arrested? He said to Enia Luco, all these kind of things. And I think we had a lot of black players then under Hope. And then he came in and listen, I don't want to sit and say, oh, this is it, but I just feel like, has that had a knock-on effect? Have people seen that? Are people my age growing up watching that and then thinking, I'm not going there? You know, I just feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm putting too much into that. And I mean, people are saying LJ could be the catalyst because, yeah, she could be, because I feel the way she plays football, that is the way everyone wants to play football, you know, the way she moves with the ball, it's amazing. But, you know, she's been labelled as kind of attitude problems, Ebony Summer attitude problems. There's not a black player that I can think of that probably hasn't been labelled with these kind of attitude problems. And is the views of coaches maybe not being aware of the you know, different cultures, you know, this kind of thing affecting it. And I don't know what you think. Michael, come in, anyone can jump in after.
I think, Nat, to be fair, like what you've just said kind of sums it up in terms of all four of us have just kind of put out different reasonings for why this may or may not be happening. And the two things from it are none of us can actually kind of scientifically prove what we're talking about. You know, you just said there, this may have had an effect. It may have done, don't get me wrong, like it probably did, if I'm being honest, longer term than maybe people thought at the time, as obviously women's football has become more visible. But we've all kind of just thrown things out there that may have had, but the other part of it is we're throwing so many different reasons that this might be happening. You know, we've probably just thrown half a dozen out, and you could probably throw another half a dozen out. And that is the issue, like that we can have emerging talent centres, etc., which we do now have, and like Sandra said, we have one at Sheffield United, but that's one fix. Like, I think cultural things are so much harder. Like, we can't go out and ask kids, you know, or what did you think of the Matt Sampson thing, or what do you think of this? We don't know. Like, we're guessing, and there's just not an easy fix to it. And even the fixes that are being put in place, and there are at least some things that are being put in place, like the ETCs. We're talking about kids, like, and even if we get them through, we're probably not going to see the benefits of it for at least another 5-10 years in terms of when they're old enough to come into a first team environment. So I don't know. I mean, we were speaking off air, obviously, about why we're getting them through in the men's game. You look at the England team, there's a pretty large percentage. It's probably quite balanced in terms of white players and black players. And again, that's through the youth teams. And you look at Premier League clubs, particularly in built-up cities. You know, you look at Chelsea, you look at Arsenal, you look at Crystal Palace, etc. It's not like that in the women's game. So there's questions to be asked about why are we getting boys through but not girls. And the problem with it, we're throwing lots of questions out there. We're throwing lots of things out there about why this is happening, but we don't really have answers. Like, we're doing little things, but it's just such a, you'll kind of feel a little bit helpless to be in terms of what we can do, because there's just so many different things I think that go into this.
I mean,
Can I just go on, Sandra? No, you go. Go on, Sandra.
I mean, this is, you know, might sound a bit bland, but is there something to be said about, you know, within these emerging talent centres with the players who happen to come through, who happen to be from, you know, black and minority ethnic backgrounds, maybe, I don't know, research where we're, you know, they're anonymously interviewed or asked questions about their experiences, or for players who decide they don't want to, if they are talented enough but decide they don't want to continue, you know, speaking to those, you know, from the minority backgrounds, why not? If you've got the talent to be pushed, what is it that's putting you off? And just to see whether there's anything in there that can inform, I don't know, you know, looking ways forward and looking at what can be done to, I don't know, improve experiences for players who might, you know, who might be looking and think, you know what, this is not for me. But, you know, again, it comes back to Rich's point about we should go out there a number of reasons, and, you know, but it's a tough one.
I think role models can be like a big thing as well. Like, I'm not a massive fan of saying like footballers should be role models. Like, you know, they can be, and I think particularly in the women's game, obviously, that they're probably more so role models than in the men's game. And I can understand, you know, if people turn on the TV and you watch England win the Euros, and it's easy for us to all get excited and things like that. And me and Nat have often like kind of joked about the fact that Nat's not really a big England fan, but when you actually sit back and think about it, you can understand why Nat doesn't maybe relate to the England team like I would, or Michael would, or most of the media would, because, you know, you turn on the celebrations and you see Leah Williamson and Millie Bright and Alessia Russo and Ella Toone and Chloe Kelly, you know, and you can go on and on and on. And, you know, I think in the summer you probably only had Keats and Demi Stokes. And now, obviously, like you say, you've got LJ, you've got Ebony. But I think if kids turn on the TV and they see Lauren James and they see, you know, Ebbs and Keats and Demi, you know, it will inspire them. It will show them that they can get there. And obviously we just don't. It's like an endless cycle because we don't have them there at the moment. So where are those role models going to come from? And you don't want to put that pressure on like young kids like LJ and Ebony to be those role models. But I think it will kind of happen naturally if they stay in the squad, which I think they will. Like, particularly LJ is more than talented enough to be there for the next 10, 15 years. So that's probably another thing you can look at. But It's a difficult, like we could do this podcast again in 10 years, and that's probably when we'll see the benefits of whatever we're doing now. And unfortunately, I just don't think it's going to be a quick fix.
I think we could still even be talking about this in 10. You said just then, and Sandra said it, why are we getting more boys through than girls? And I think, to be honest, a lot of it's to do with money. I know that's not why you play football, but I look at, 21s. No one gets paid in the 21. As soon as you turn 18 as a man, probably even a bit before that, you are getting money through. You're getting your Nike sponsorship boot deal. You're getting, you see them driving around in the under 18s, nice fancy cars, getting taken around like this and that, like you're the king of England. And the women's, we know it is like that, but a lot of these girls are having to fit around full-time work, this kind of thing. And it's especially COVID. I mean, not 100 but back it was probably a bit easier because cost of living and all that kind of stuff, it was less. But I just feel like
one thing
clubs have got a lot to answer for as well in that respect. But go on, Michael.
No, I was just going to say, one thing I think we do need to scale back and understand is the scale of the problem. And Rich alluded to it. Like, it's a huge amount of pressure, almost a savior complex, to put on someone like Lauren James, who is young and dealing with their own issues in life, as all of us as individuals do, to then be like, oh, no pressure, but can you single-handedly be the person that transforms all of this? Like, we've had Anita Sante, Drew Spence, Eniola Aluko. We've had the number of non-white players in Women's World Cup squads actually go down from six down to 2 from 2007 to 2019, if memory serves me correctly, compared with 12 non-white players in that men's side under Southgate a few years ago. And I know people sometimes can be a little bit, oh yeah, they're just some numbers. But I think sometimes when people are quoting examples and case studies, it can be useful to have numbers because they actually give you a sense of what's going on across the board. And that was what brought me back to comparing the WSL with the EFL and the Premier League, because that is elite men's football in England and elite women's football in England. And I'd commentated on both, seen the disparity for years, but actually wanted to really dig down further. So I did. And in short, you are more than 3 times more likely to see a non-white player in the Premier League than in the Barclays Women's Super League. And you are more than 2.5 times more likely to see a non-white player in the English Football League, 2nd, 3rd and 4th division, if you want to be old school, Championship, League 1 and League 2 now, than in the Barclays Women's Super League. So this season, 233 players have played in the WSL, and 13.3% of those players are non-white. And of all of the minutes played by players in the WSL, 11.8% of those minutes have been played by non-white players. Because I really wanted to dig right down into visibility in the most literal sense of like how many minutes are you seeing these players on the pitch for. Now that's across, give or take, almost a third of a season. So, I had someone today turn around to me, because Twitter's just Twitter, and sort of say, oh, this is a very limited sample size because the season's barely started. And it was like, what? Yeah, it's not like it's not like every WSL team has got like 4 or 5 non-white players who've all not played so far who are magically going to turn up and play in match day 8. Like this number of, 11% of the playing minutes, 13% of the squads is not going to drastically change, overnight. Now, by comparison, the population of people who identify as non-white is circa 15% as of 2019. The 2021 census results are coming soon. There might be a minor change up or down in that, but we're in the 15% region for the population. So the number in the WSL is already below the population. So you might think, okay, that's not ideal. But then you put it next to elite men's football, and it really gets quite staggering quite quickly. So the Szymanski report, which was a comparison, it was commissioned by the Black Footballers Partnership, found that 43% of Premier League players are non-white, 34% in the Football League. So you've got 43% in the men's top tier, 34% in the 3 divisions below, and that's 92 clubs between all those divisions. So you can't exactly be sitting there saying that this isn't a big enough sample size compared to the 12 WSL teams where it's at 12-13%. And what I find scary is I still, having published that, have people who've thought to come back to that and find ways to very quickly and simplistically explain that away. And that is just, now there are a multitude of potential factors for that, but you cannot sit there and look at that gap, which isn't a gap. I mean, it's just stratospheric, 3 or 2.5 times, and say that there is not things potentially even below the grassroots working up, as we've discussed, that are just not working as we speak. And the only other thing I've had that was interesting, that was in Tim Stillman's video, is the regional talent centre that Drew Spence went to in West London doesn't exist anymore. The regional talent centre that Dan Carter came through, once of Arsenal, now at Brighton, in Romford, doesn't exist anymore. So that clearly helps. But also, I think the idea that is, changing that is just the one fix that's going to magically sort this, seems to me, how do I put it politely, incredibly optimistic.
Yeah. Unfortunately, guys, Sandra's going to have to leave because she's got work. So I just wanted to let Sandra say her goodbyes in 10 minutes. So if she leaves, then that's why she's going to work. Well, no, I totally agree with you. I think it's the numbers that you're talking about. And like you say, the fact that people are casually just explaining it away, the fact that we're not seeing articles being written all the time. It shouldn't just be on Sandra. I don't know, Sandra, you best to answer, but I think you're the only sort of full-time black journalist. I don't know, maybe there are others, but I feel like you're the only full-time written one that I can fully think of my head. Maybe there are others, I don't know, but then it shouldn't just always be on you or Asif or someone else like that to always write it. I think it should be on everyone. And Catherine here has put something. The FA have done these reports. They've asked for these things. Like you said, I've been speaking about it since I've been watching in 2018, and they came up with all these grand plans. And this is one of the grand plans that they came up with, leadership and diversity. And this isn't to slag the FA off. This isn't to slag the clubs off. This is just to show where we're at. And it's saying the percentage of senior management hires for both female and black and Asian candidates, they did not achieve it. So I think it's all these things. I mean, I know in your thread it talks about the Rooney Rule, and there's talk about that in men's football. What we see, I feel like even in the Premier League and the EFL, we're seeing more mixed race, black, Asian managers. Maybe it's just me because I'm seeing it. When I see a black manager, I'm like, oh, Liam Messina, for example, Hull, great. I'm seeing it, so it's resonating a bit more. But obviously this comment is saying that the FA are setting targets of clubs and they're not meeting them. So what is the kind of, you set these targets, you not meet them, oh well, move on, let's set another target, we're not going to meet that, oh well, move on.
Yeah. One thing I would add, sorry to jump in, is I definitely think the Rooney Rule is widely misunderstood and something that would help. There's so many misconceptions about what the Rooney Rule is, and so many people that don't really seem to be that interested in actually taking the time to try and educate themselves about what it is, how it works, and why it works. It is not giving a job to a non-white person for the sake of that. It is not quotas, but it is giving them an opportunity to interview for a position. And anyone who has ever done a job interview in their life will know that you learn from the very experience of preparing for and doing that job interview. You make networking connections via that interview happening. And if you read about how this has worked in the NFL, often that interview that has maybe come about through the Rooney Rule doesn't lead to instantaneously the non-white candidate getting the job, but then they have made a connection and a network has been created. And then that owner rings that coach 6 months later and says, oh, do you want to come in and run our development camp or our youth camp or our academy camp? And that leads to them getting offered the position in charge of an NFL team. Or a year later, the coach they've got doesn't work and they get offered that position straight up at the top of the organization running that NFL team. To me, the Rooney Rule is something that I mean, it's been used in not just sport, but in business in America very successfully. And I think that is something that would make a huge difference in terms of we've seen what it's done with the NFL in terms of giving non-white people an opportunity they otherwise might not have to do something to try and account for what we know has been decades and decades and decades where it has been so far the other way around.
And you know what? The Rooney Rule is something that's used, like you say, you said, in business in America, but it is, how can I say, it's used here in England, in the health service, in police, in councils. So when we look at it deep down, the FA is a government-run kind of organisation. Whether it's not fully, but they get support through the government, and it could be that something like that would be put in place in women. Because we know that we can see it. You talked about the numbers. You talked about 11%. I don't know, Rich. What would you think if, for example, not saying for the girls to come through, but coaches, they put in a rule like that where you had to interview? Obviously, it wouldn't just be Joe Blogs like me coming up, I want to be Sheffield United assistant manager or whatever. But it would be someone who has been a whatever, wants to be a GM, and then you interviewed, say, a non-white person, and then, like you say, you might not want it, but then when it comes up at Coventry or whoever else local, they go, and then I just feel like representation matters, Karen's saying. But if we can't get them straight in that way, it may be good to get more coaches, more support staff that are of different minorities, so that when the players do come through, they feel comfortable because they can see, my GM's like, let me just go to them. I can. They know what I'm going through. They can feel it. If I raise an issue, they might know. I mean, what do you think when you the Rooney Rule maybe being applied that way in women's football?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have an issue with it. If it's going to help the situation or it's going to give people more opportunities, then yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm still, in any walk of life, in any job, male, female, white, black, it should be the best person for the job. But like you say, it's about giving opportunities that maybe are not there, or at least to give them the opportunity to interview and get in that position at least, and to have a chance. We have a part-time physio who's black at Sheffield United Women, and whether that has an effect on any of our, I don't know. I don't know who interviews for our jobs. Obviously, we're interviewing for general manager at the moment. I won't obviously be privy to that in terms of how many people are interviewed, from what backgrounds or age groups or male, female, whatever. I saw your tweet, Nat, to be fair, about coming for it. Don't. But no, seriously, I think so. Yeah, I don't see why not. I think it's helping in the men's game. It was obviously introduced for a reason, to give more opportunities. So if it's something we can introduce, either identically or with slight changes for the women's game, then if it's not going to hurt, then why not?
Mm-hmm. Sandra, just going to come to you. I know you've got to leave basically in a minute, but thank you. If you want to say any last points, you can do, and we might wrap up anyway. But
yeah, I agree with some of what Rich was saying there. That I mean, there's lots of recruitment schemes where they're across various work sectors, but I guess growing now a little bit in sport. In terms of trying to boost numbers of people in different jobs from minority and black backgrounds, minority ethnic backgrounds, and I guess, like you say, if it can be done within football coaching, you encourage, and that would be helpful. I guess also, the blind CV recruitment as well, so you just don't see the names, just in terms, so that if there is any form of bias, not that I'm saying there is, that might be removed, but it's what I find quite good. For example, at West Ham, they've just recruited their academy manager, a guy called Joseph Cocker, who's got loads of experience of coaching. I think he's the first black WSL academy manager, perhaps. So that's good to see. So you want to see more of that, or see if there are coaches that want to come through, maybe just more opportunities for them to be able to do that. But I guess it all depends on who applies, when they apply, and what's available. But maybe there's something about blind recruitment and blind CV recruitment as well to prevent any form of bias. But
yeah. There's just, I know you got to go, Sandra, so I really appreciate, but there's just one last thing, I suppose, with the boys, if they're happy to stay on.
Cheers. Thanks very much, and have a good evening. Cheers.
Cheers, Sandra.
Cheers, Sandra. Bye.
Bye.
So you said, Rich, and I hope you don't mind staying on for this last thing. You said, oh, it doesn't hurt anyone, the Rooney Rule, and all these kind of things. But I think we've seen with the Beth Mead, with this topic, when we do talk about it, there's always the people that are saying, great. But then there's always the people, this is what I said. I'll come back to you. I'm not bothered. Yeah, that say stuff like this. It's a non-issue, created in the minds, people with a victim mentality rather than logic. There's other people that will say things like, but she's right. It is coincidental. The best players, we want the best players. We want, we won it with 11 white girls. Why are we going to change it? Of course, we're the best.
No, but they'd be even better. But I feel,
listen, this is the life that I live. Yeah, this is the life that I live. So there's people who think, well, we won the Euros, so then pretend LJ comes in and we don't win the World Cup. Oh, and there will be people, because whether we like to admit it or not, you see, it's all this talk about this and you're diluting it and you're this. That's what they say, yeah? And whether they say it consciously knowing that they're going out to be racist, or whether they say it like, shit, well, we did win it with the white girls. Now these two black girls come in, we have, 2 and 2 equals 4 kind of thing. That's how Rashford and all his... and then got, the 3 black players, all these effing, and, that's how it all happened,
You know what the most depressing thing about that was? I was watching that with a whole pile of people, actually, at my cricket club. Lovely bunch. And as soon as, forgive me, because brains filtered out every last iota of that shootout, but Rashford, I think, might have been the second to take. It was Sancho, then Rashford, then Saka. As soon as Sancho stepped up, I was next to a guy called Sahil, who's mixed race, who played cricket, and the first thing we both said was, "Oh, please don't have Sancho miss, because if he misses, we know what will happen." And then Sancho missed, and then Marcus Rashford stepped up, who's done so much brilliant work off the pitch as well. And we literally looked at each other, it was like a deja vu sort of thing, and we found ourselves again being like, "Oh, please," because of all the people, because of what. And then obviously we know how the story ends. Saka misses, and it just said a lot to me about the fact that, and it wasn't just the two of us saying this. This was said by quite a few people there and heard, and everyone kind of nodded and like, "Yep, that's going to happen." And to me, that kind of sums it up. What I think is also worth saying, to bring it back to women's football, is the FA do know about this, and they are doing various things to try and change it. So in 2021, Baroness Sue Campbell, FA Director of Women's Football, for those who don't know, so she told BBC Sport it was linked to accessibility. But these were direct quotes, which were very direct. She said, it's not inclusive enough and it's not diverse enough, and we know it. So there is clearly a level of awareness about that that exists. So, yeah, I mean, it's not that people don't sort of know about this.
Yeah, but for me, I think it is that, I know I don't want to come back to it, but I feel like women's football, and I don't know what you think, Rich, it's in a bubble. And sometimes some people don't want to say anything negative. So this is a negative, and to say, oh, we've got this issue with this, it's as if, even when you look at it with women's football, when they talk about LGBT, it's such a safe space for LGBT fans and LGBT players, but then you can maybe say it isn't as such a safe space for Black and ethnic minorities. I mean, I've seen tweets from I think she works for ITV, and it's saying how girls are coming into Grassroots, your hair doesn't fit, your this doesn't fit, you're not eating this, jerk chicken, things like that, why are you eating hot pepper sauce, why have you got braids in your hair, these kind of things. And I feel like what Sandra said before, I know she's gone, but it's as if there's a resistance to talk about these issues that are going on. Even in the NWSL, we talk about the abuse. It took so long for them to do that that Yatesy report. You know, there is a resistance from the media as well, Rich. And I hope you don't mind me saying this, but whether it's from the media, FA, clubs, they just don't want anything negative. They just want, we're perfect, everyone loves everyone. Da, da, da. We know that's not the case. We know that people have attitude or people have this or that, you know, but, you know, that's sort of then going into that other thing. But, you know, it's as if we can't even talk about it. We can't even talk about a player who might have an attitude, you know. And I just feel like there is a resistance. We talk about it, Rich. You say journalists might not want to say this because they'll get a snapback. And like you say, we've seen on here, there's been a few comments where people are saying, oh, you're making a big deal out of nothing. But it is a deal. And Sue Campbell has said, like you said, directly. So what is it? What do you think, Rich? Do you think women's football needs to change a bit? And there needs to be more from the media, bringing it up, raising it more than just on Black History Month and kind of thing?
I think we do. I think there's two sides to it. I think generally over the years, there has been a perception, obviously, of women's football and the desperation to promote it as this, you know, sort of clean bill of health, you know, compared to the men's game, and that everything's fantastic and rosy and, you know, this is the future and whatnot. And like you say, human nature suggests it's not. There's going to be stories, and, you know, we saw with the NWSL, we've seen stories here, you know, things people don't like. We had Dubai Gate and whatnot, and it's not perfect, you know, and I think that's changing. I do think it's changing. I think there's another step to go still in terms of the acceptance of criticism within women's football, whether that's criticism to players, criticism to managers, to clubs, the FA, of us in the media. We get criticism. There is, I think with racism, it's that, but it's also one step beyond that. I think there is just a general discomfort around talking about it because it is such a sensitive issue. Like even the other day, I put my little thread out, which I waited to do until the day after because I wanted to actually think about what I actually wanted to say. But there was always that sort of little twinge in me of, am I saying the right thing? Am I going to get accused of this or get accused of that? And I even spoke to Sandra afterwards. I said, look, what I've said here, is this coming across clearly? You know, because, and I think there's just this general unease around it because it's such a sensitive topic, but we do have to talk about it. You know, Flo's right in what she said, that we're not going to get anywhere if we don't. And in life in general, like in everybody's life, forget football, you have to have difficult conversations that you don't like. And within women's football and within sport in general, this is one of them. So we can't back away from it. I think it's just constant education. It's constant education, because that bugs me when I see people say, you know, there's no issue and, you know, we pick the best 11 players. I get that. Of course you do. Every manager picks the best 11 players. I don't believe Serena Wiegman picks her 11 based on race or ethnicity. She picks her best 11 on what's there. It's educating the wider issue of why they're not there, you know, which is a systemic problem. We know that. We absolutely know that. And we've talked for an hour and we've not come up with any sort of clear conclusion over what to do. I actually just saw a tweet. I'd be interested to go back and watch the build-up to the England game, which is obviously just starting, because Ian Wright and Eni Aluko were the two pundits. And from what I've just seen, I think it was discussed on there. And Ian Wright said he'd actually rang Beth to talk about it, not nastily, but to sort of just offer some education. So I'll probably go back and watch that and see what was said. But that's what it needs to be talked about on mainstream TV. It needs to be talked about before the England game. But it does, like I said, need to be. We can talk about it. I can talk about it. Michael can talk about it. Of course we can, and we should. But we haven't experienced it. We haven't faced those barriers. We haven't faced that prejudice. Eni has. Ian Wright probably has. So it'll be interesting to hear from them, because they're the ones that we can really relate to and listen to, and that is what we need to do. We need to listen. Because
you talk about Eni, though, and half that team haven't even apologized. Lucy Bronze haven't even apologized to us. So I feel like, yes, there is that education, but there's still that education at the top of the game that obviously, well, Beth's exposed that. I think a lot of them do, but I won't be surprised if a lot of them think like Beth, maybe, you know?
Yeah,
And that's where I come back to it. Probably had, I know we can't confirm it's had an impact, but 9 times out of 10, I'm guessing that has had an impact on what we see today.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dig back to 2017 because obviously it was a story that I covered. I was working in women's football at the time, and I'm not defending the players for what they did or what they didn't do, but from being inside that story at the time, I don't think the FA didn't help the players. They were kind of left hung out to dry. They weren't really fully informed of what was going on. You know, obviously the infamous picture of them all going to celebrate with Mark Sampson when obviously he was going to be sacked the next day. The players weren't aware of. I think they kept a lot. There was a lot of people who made a lot of mistakes during that because no one had ever been involved in something like that before in women's football, whether that was us as the media, whether that was the FA, the players, and nobody really knew how to handle it. I think the players were kind of kept at arm's length of what was going on because the FA didn't want them to start. They didn't want things to start leaking or players to start talking. So the players weren't perfect, you know, in terms of how they reacted to it, but they also weren't probably. I think it would be different today. But like I said, I don't want to dig back to 2017, but there was a lot of people, including us in the media, that didn't handle that situation as it should have been. And the outcome in terms of Mark leaving may have been the same in the end, but for different reasons and probably much more smoother than it ended up being. And like this situation now where we're talking about it, it was probably something that needed to happen for some changes to be made. And in a way, what Beth has said maybe is a good thing because it's actually got us talking about it. And you need those moments every now and again to be able to offer that education. And I said on Twitter, I very much include myself in that. I'm a white male, you know, I haven't experienced it. I haven't broken down those barriers. I've worked hard, you know, and Michael's worked hard, but we need to listen to people like you and to people like Sandra and to the players. And if I'm being honest, we probably don't do that enough.
No, I don't know. James has put don't talk about the Sissoko incident, but I don't know what he means, but I think he means potentially, you know, obviously the abuse she got after that, you know, the way that potentially maybe, you know, a lot of people have actually talked about that and said Sarah Malin potentially should have got a punishment as well. And I think it's just little things like that maybe in 2018 you wouldn't have seen that. You would have seen just, oh, she's aggressive, she's this, she's that. Whereas I feel like, you know, now people are saying 1 minute, if that was in the men's game, they both would have got red cards and they both would have been sent off. And I've seen a lot of people talking about how unfair it was to Sissoko and a lot of people defending Sissoko. But then I also seen people not justifying, but sort of saying, oh, well, she deserves it. She deserves the abuse she got. She, you know, this kind of thing. And I think there's always going to be those kind of voices that will say negative things because, you know, it's the society we live in. So I think it is on the voices that know it's wrong, that know racism is wrong and know that more needs to be done, to be speaking out and saying it and to be saying things and defending these players. And like we said, for me, I look at LJ, I look at Ebbs. They're players that I started watching when I was watching it. Obviously, I was drawn to LJ, not only because she was like one of the best players, but because she was like a little sister to me. She looks like me. Ebbs as well, I was drawn to her. Again, both like my little sisters. That's how I still see them, even though they've left me. But I'm happy for them. I'm happy. And, you know, this is... they've had their challenges to get in the squad now. You know, I can't say that they haven't. I feel like that as black women, they worked hard, they were called, you know, bad attitudes, this and that. But then we've seen white women say have bad attitudes, and the level of defence for them isn't potentially the same as a level of defence for LJ. But maybe in this time it will be, because a lot's changed from when LJ was labelled with it to when a player, Hampton, was labelled with it. This now. So I do feel, though, with the amount of TV coverage, like you're saying, Ian Wright and Annie were on the telly today. Obviously, they've chose them, whether they were on purpose or not. It's good that Ian's come out. I was gutted for me when LJ left. LJ was my sister, man, but I'm happy for her. I saw her. She came straight over to me at Chelsea. She came over to me at the end. I do feel that she will. It's a lot on her shoulders, but she will be the catalyst, because she's one of the best players around, and someone like that winning it's going to be what everyone wants to see. But I'm going to wrap up. I don't know if anyone, Michael, Rich, just I suppose you want to give your last words. I mean, we have talked, haven't we, about what can be done. Like I said, it's not what will be done. It's just we're seeing the ETC, whether we'll see, the Rooney Rule, more, black girls only, these things like that. No, that was sort of shut down, but, definitely the Rooney Rule, I feel like the more coaching, the more staff that are of an ethnic minority, that is only going to help for me. And I hope it is something that they do look to put in. But I do think things like what Sandra is saying, go into these girls who are in grassroots, speaking, making, hearing their stories, big media organisations printing it, I feel like we have resistance there, not just from maybe like what Rich is saying, he might be resistant, but if then, say, Catherine or Emma did go to their editor, but then they face with it, things like that, yes, we're seeing now that there wants to be a talk about it. People want to talk about it because it's fresh. But if the Mead thing didn't happen, would there be that drive? And I feel it's like keeping on, making sure. I know I get where Sandra's coming from. She doesn't want to keep talking about it, and I'm the same. I don't want to keep talking about it. But if you don't talk about it, you'll never
thing, right?
see a change.
But this is where I think the onus is on white people and white journalists to talk about it as well, because otherwise, as you were alluding to, and I know it's not by any means the exact same thing, but the way I've heard people like you talk about with that reminds me of being someone who's LGBTQ and also works in men's football, because being LGBTQ in women's football is one story, the men's thing is a different thing altogether. And there's a hell of a lot of people who don't really understand what being an ally is. They kind of seem to think it's just sort of staying quiet and saying nothing, with the whole, well, I'm not saying anything, so I'm not going to offend you by being homophobic. And it's like, well, yeah, but you're not really kind of actually engaging meaningfully with this subject and the discrimination and the lack of visibility and everything else. And so you're not really actually helping here. And this is also a message to myself as much as anything else, but there is a real onus on white people to, as well as listen to and obviously engage with non-white communities, ethnic minority communities, BAME communities about what needs to change, and do that. It cannot just be people from non-white backgrounds having to keep endlessly, tirelessly having to raise this, because it's just not white. It's just not right. Sorry, that was an inadvertent but quite ironic bit of wordplay that was not deliberate. White people have to get over their sort of paralysis of fear of saying the wrong thing or ignoring it or just hoping it goes away, any of those possible combinations, and discuss it. And not just discuss it in a cursory, here's one small thing I'm putting out, or as well, just, oh, here's a non-white person who's written really well about this. It's like, yes, that's great. By all means, amplify those voices. That's really important. But also use your platform and your voice to try and educate yourself and spread meaningful conversation about it. Because if you've got the non-white population in the UK, as I said before, at about 15%, and you've got the other 85% barely engaging with this, some of whom have unconscious bias, some of whom I would suggest even have conscious bias, then you're not going to get anywhere, because it's just exhaustively relying on this small group of people to have to keep doing this and reliving their experiences of discrimination. So, you know, that is very much a hold of accountability to myself as much as anyone else listening or watching or viewing. But the idea of being scared of getting it wrong is not a good enough reason to just not engage with it, because any fear you might have of getting it wrong or this kind of thing, or paralysis to discuss it, is not going to be one iota, a millionth, 1 percentile of the fear and, you know, horror of someone from a non-white background who's actually experienced discrimination. And we'd be in a much better place, I think, if a lot more white people actually really tried to remember that when thinking, should I try and engage with that? Let's play it safe. Because we all lose out from lack of equality of opportunity, right from the bottom to the top of sport. And, you know, Tim Stillman said it on his video. Loads of other people have said it. The Lionesses would be even better if those numbers that I discussed earlier were more level between the men's and the women's game. How many brilliant non-white players have we missed out on in this Lionesses side that could make them even better, but for whatever reason stopped playing? So that would be my final thought.
Yeah, and Rich, no, it's good. It is good, Michael, and I really appreciate it. And I know we've been going for a while, but Rich, just I suppose final thoughts with you. And yeah, I know you said in 10 years' time we'll do this and that. I'm not saying 10 years till we have this conversation, but it's conversations like this that I'd like to have again with more people, bringing in different voices, and I'm sure you'd want to be part of it again. And both of you, welcome. I'll get Sandra in again, you know, with different voices. And like you say, it's a conversation we need to keep having. And just your final thoughts before we say goodbye to everyone.
Yeah, what's interesting about what Michael said, obviously he talked about the LGBT conversations and that was obviously brought up, something that was brought up at the start of this, and something that was brought up this week again by Flo, about Beth Mead obviously being so comfortable to talk about LGBTQ situation and issues around the world. And what's interesting about that is sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago, when I first was getting involved in women's football, that was kind of a little bit like this now. It wasn't commonly talked about. It was sort of a bit of a taboo thing. Like, people maybe knew that certain players were LGBT, but it wasn't really talked about. It was kind of, oh, don't talk about this, don't do that. And then it was obviously Casey Stoney who was sort of the first one to come out and talk about it publicly on national TV, and then suddenly lots of other people followed, and like even now there are players that are not publicly out, but they also don't need to be publicly out because the game has got to such a profile where people know they are anyway, whether that's through social media or whatnot. So it's become a really commonly talked about thing, and something that people are quite comfortable talking about because so many people have done. And that's the big thing about this, is not many people are, because it's uncomfortable. It's the same situation as what we had 6, 7 years ago. So we do need to talk, because the more people talk, the more normal the conversation will become. And like I said, it's constant education, and I include myself in that. I mean, you know, I grew up completely white family. Like, the most ethnic difference in my family is I'm half Northern Irish. That's it. You know, I grew up in a white community. I went to a school where probably 95% of people were white. You know, my friends were white, and obviously in an age where you're young and you're not, you know, fixed to the news and things like that, like you are when you get older, and social media wasn't around at that time, you're ignorant towards it because you've no need to learn about it. You don't know it's out there. You don't know it exists. And it's only when you go out into the real world and you meet people and you start working with people, like working with Sandra and working with people like Jess Crichton at Sky Sports and Natasha Henry, and getting to know people like you, Nat, you know, when you hear, and even talking to players, you know, the players that I wouldn't have known when I was at school, whether that's people I've worked with at Sheffield United, whether that's just general WSL players, England players, players around the world who I've interviewed or got to know. And then you hear the stories and you hear the experiences that you didn't know about 10, 15 years ago when you were completely switched off. And I will admit, my view and my opinion and my sort of attention towards it has changed tenfold, because I'm not ignorant towards it anymore because I know it exists. I know it's out there, and I think, like you say, it's just we can all play a role, whether we're white, whether we're black, whether we're male, whether we're female. We can all play a role, and I hope. I mean, you don't want to have to keep talking about racism. It's that strange thing of every time you have to talk about it, it means something's happened, which you don't want, but it's going to, and we have to, and hopefully in 5-6 years, the conversation is much easier to have because we're talking about it much more commonly, and people aren't scared to have a view, or they're not shot down for having a view. And yeah, like I said, I include myself in that. I know Michael will include himself in that, and his thread was very informative. And whilst I've tried to educate myself, there was a lot in there I didn't know about, which is why I drew attention to it. So yeah, there's no easy answer to it all. Like we've said, that there's so many things that need to change, some that are changeable, some that maybe aren't, to be honest with you, in terms of history and culture. But yeah, I think if we can keep having the conversation and keep educating, then we can only sort of try and improve things.
I would add
Definitely.
just one tiny thing, even though I know we're pretty much done, which is, and Rich picked up on it there, and he's right too, about it gets talked about after an incident. Now, I haven't watched all this clip, but I've just pulled it up from ITV Football, and the headline of the clip, and this is Beth Mead's, the discussion around Beth Mead, Ian Wright, Ennio Luco. No, Ian Wright's had a phone call with Beth Mead about it, which sounds very promising and really quite constructive. But the headline, which I think sums it up really nicely, I don't actually know if the quote is from a Luco or right, because I haven't watched the video because we're on a live stream, but it's a systemic problem and we just deal with it in incidents. I think that sums it up really nicely. And in a sense, this is another example, because if the Beth Mead thing does not happen, then we're not having this conversation at this moment, to be honest. And that conversation that's just happened on ITV Sport at that moment probably doesn't happen either. And I guess that's trying to break that cycle where it's not just waiting for another incident to happen, then it gets discussed, and then, but anyway.
No, I agree. And that's why I'm going to try and do it more often and not, maybe not, once a year. I know it might not sound a lot, but once a year. Yeah, see where we have been. I've had these conversations with Sandra before. I've had them with players on YouTube, things like that. Go back, look at my personal. I've tried to do it, but it is hard. If there isn't an incident, people aren't talking about it, and that's where we need to try and stop the cycle. Talk about it freely, talk about it regularly. I talked about it a lot. I thought some of our players were sort of, treated differently because of race, and some players have even said it to me off the record. But it's about feeling confident for them to say it on the record. Yes, I feel this. Yes, they might be playing tier 3 or 4 now, but it doesn't matter if they were in a RTC and they felt they were treated differently, and these kind of things, they need to be spoken about. We can't dismiss it. We can't dismiss it as, oh, well, they're not a good player. No, we need to be open and be willing to talk about it. And I just hope it's not been an attack on Beth Mead. It's not an attack on Arsenal. It's not an attack on the FA. And I think you even said it, didn't you? It's not about which club badge you wear. I mean, it would hurt me more if it wasn't Man United. So I hope that it's just educated a lot of players that probably are in best situation, that are quite, what Rich said, like, they didn't need to think about it. I hope they've realised that they do need to think about it, because like you say, the more diversity, the better we are. So, I hope to see more, and I hope we'll do these soon. But yeah, Michael, Rich, thanks for everyone for watching. Watch back, share, like, share, subscribe. Yeah, thank you both. And next week we'll be doing Man United chat. So we're back again, guys. We're doing videos, so definitely check it out. But we had to do this one. I had, couldn't ignore it. I mean, won't ignore it. But yeah, next week we're doing Man United chat. Back to basics, you can say. But these chats will be continuing to happen on this channel. Don't worry about it. Thank you very much, guys. Good night. Enjoy yourself.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.